You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. I have a lot of really cool friends who do a lot of really cool things. I wanted to make it a goal to sit down with these friends and spend about 15 minutes or so getting to know them better and find out about their past, present, and their future. The result is this show. My name is Grant Baciocco, and this is 15 Minutes With. Tom Konkle is an actor, a writer, and director, and is today's guest on 15 Minutes With. Tom, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Grant. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
We were talking when you came in that we haven't seen each other in
it's been
a
almost,
long time.
I would say 2 decades almost.
Yeah,
we started off doing live sketch together, doing comedy songs and things. That's how we kind of bonded, doing these little gigs, all different places.
Coffee houses.
Exactly. And I remember being very impressed with your stuff
and
wanted to kind of stay connected, but life always intrudes. And I know you've got your thing going on, and then my career took some interesting twists, and I don't perform live sketch as much anymore.
Well, I want to talk to you about all the stuff you're working on because you got some fun stuff. But where did you grow up?
I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., Alexandria, Annandale, that area. It's an interesting place to grow up because you are a minority. Not only are you a minority racially, but also people from all around the world are constantly in the area. Like all of my friends had people at the embassy. My mom worked at the Pentagon. It was military families. So to form friendships, I think I had a haunted house in July because that's when people least expected it. But it was also how to get kids interested and bond and make quick friendships, as we used to do these little productions. I remember having puppet productions when I was a kid in a show, and I would get somebody enrolled in it, and it was a way to bond with them because you knew they were leaving. In a year or two, the families would cycle out and move somewhere else. So it was a weird place to grow up, but I was there for 20 years. And I moved from there to Los Angeles.
And did you? It's interesting because you're saying you put on productions and stuff. Because I did the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Were you sort of the ringleader? Hey guys, let's do this.
Absolutely. I was the instigator. I had the at my time it was a Super 8 camera. I would come up with visual gags and stuff, or I'd do live stuff, or like I say, I literally made a haunted forest in my backyard. But I'd do it on months where they wouldn't expect a haunted house, which always scared people more. So I would do that. I was that guy. I loved it. I think obviously that formed a lot. I'm still doing it as an adult. I think I was a naturally inclined person, but I loved having friendships with a purpose. To me, some people could just get together and chill even when they were just kids, but I love to rally around a friendship but also have something to show for it, if that makes any sense. It was hey, we should write something and we should do it, we should film it, and that carried on through my entire career. I tend to work with friends.
Yeah. What was sort of the first, because you were putting on these shows and stuff, but what inspired that? What were you watching as a kid or consuming that inspired that?
Okay, it was a dual whammy of pop culture. Obviously, everybody says this, but it is actually true. When I first saw Star Wars, I literally, driving home from the car, told my parents, I'm leaving. And they're like, what are you going to do? And I go, I'm putting you in the home. Because I'm an only child. I've got to go to Los Angeles. I was born in the wrong place. I literally had that conversation in the car. Because more than just it being Star Wars, prior to that, as you know, movies in the 70s, world building wasn't really big, particularly science fiction. And the sort of witty banter in Star Wars, resonated with the comic part of me, but the world building part of it, I was fascinated by what you could do because it was such a huge step up from Logan's Run or all the other looks. And I think that formed one aspect of me. I've had a camera in my hand ever since, and that's what the writer-director Tom was. Mm-hmm. The other was Monty Python, and I found it through PBS. And I remember watching it, and it was the House Hunters episode. And I must have been 8 or 9, and I was like, these are people that think like me. When I remember as a kid, I saw a sign that said topless bar, and then to me, it was a bar that went on forever. and I was like, oh, they take things that are surreal and literal and mix them up. And so Python on one side, which was one Tom, and that became sort of performer Tom and also writer for doing comedy. And then Star Wars for world building, which was much more, it fed a different part of my brain. And sent me on a journey that I'm still on with my own feature of how do I build a world and I like making mainstream genre stuff. I've never had a pretension. I want to make good stuff, but to me, a great B movie from the 80s, 90s, whatever, that is just as valid an art form creatively. If you have intent to do what you promise you're going to do, then Enter the Dragon is just as valid as something, cowboys eating pudding kind of out there, kind of, you know what I mean? Where it's an important film. It's good for you. It's like, I would rather be known as Tom Konkle, the guy who makes great genre projects, or he's really funny and does edgy, so stupid it's genius kind of smart comedy. That's me.
Yeah.
And I think those two things sort of interweaving, I dance between the two of them, and I'm not sure how I reconcile them. I think there is a duality. There's a one Tom where I didn't know you were so serious because you're always doing, Adventure with Brian Forbes or working with John Cleese or whatever. But then the other me is doing a film noir set in the 40s where there's 3,000 composite shots in my film, which is as much as Revenge of the Sith. Only it's two guys doing it, me and Mike Smith.
Yeah.
And that skill, knowing how to do that, I've melded together.
Yeah.
And I think that's the long answer to it, but it's the truth, is that there wasn't one single thing. You're the product of all your influences. And those were two very major ones that I carry on to this day.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned, you said you were going to put your parents in a home because you had to move to L.A. Were your parents supportive? Were they like, okay, put us in a home, go follow your dream? Or
Not at all. I don't think they understood. I was the first person to ever go to college in my family. I'm actually the last of my line. There were no other sort of Konkles, and I was an only child. My parents weren't supposed to be able to have children. And so there was a really close bond. They always treated me as an adult. But they did make the mistake of being supportive and exposing me to all this. I mean, someone drove me to Star Wars.
Right.
Someone let me watch Monty Python. I caught my dad giggling at it, And my dad's very dry. If there's something bad, he'll go, "Oh, terrific! I'll be sure and miss it." And it'll be so dry. You're like, "Wait a minute." And then my mom, when she gets giggling, it's the best laugh in the world. So there's some part of it where I was like, "Am I adopted?" Because I played piano. No one in my family had ever played a musical instrument. But then they're so supportive. They took me for art lessons, and I painted a painting. I remember to this day. It was over the piano that I practiced on, of a conductor and stuff. And one point, my mom and my dad said, "I wish we had been exposed to it." And even my grandparents, I had one set of grandparents left when I was born. I played piano for him one time at midnight, and he sat in a chair falling asleep. And this guy, tough country guy, goes, "I wish I had always learned. I wish I had learned to play a musical instrument, or I wish I'd been exposed to it." They just didn't have the chance to be exposed to it. They were not supportive. They still don't understand it. I think there was a moment in New York where I was the spokesman in a commercial. I've done 100+ commercials, and they had never been on a set or done anything. Well, it was on the East Coast, so I was like, "Come up to New York. We'll look around." And I had, I was staying in a penthouse apartment overlooking the park in New York City, and I had my own car. I had a car that picked me up and drove me there. So my parents came up in a train, and I had been doing that now for about 11 years. And you could tell they were kind of looking around and like, "This is nice." I'm like, "Yeah, John Lennon used to live next door at that place." And he goes, "This is what you do?" And I think a tumbler went, because up to then they were like, "I don't understand." Like, "Hey, they used to videotape me on VHS or whatever. And they'd be like, 'Hey, we filmed you. We don't want to give away what you did, but actually you died at the end of this thing. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but we'll mail you the tape.'" And they would mail me the tape. And I thought that was so funny and cute, but that's how they saw me.
Yeah.
My mom's latest comment, though, is, "I always thought that you'd give up and come back to Virginia." But the dynamic changed when I had my son. I had him in 2008. And within a month of him being born, they sold their house in Virginia, and both of them moved out here. I found them a house out here, and now they've been here, and they've got to spend time with me. I used to see them once a year. Now I get to see them all the time. So I think their paradigm has shifted. And creatively, I've always been pushing against them, and I don't think they've seen most of what I've done, and I don't think they'd care for it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny to me that you mentioned that you were an only child, because I do have a brother, but I was by myself for about 8 years before my brother came along. So kind of 9 years.
Right.
And so I wonder do you think like being an only child and having to entertain yourself, kind of, because you don't have a brother around, is like huge to creativity?
I do. I used to have my dad had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I used to do interviews with myself on the tape deck. And there are hours of it where I remember my parents actually transferred one of the reels where he's like, I interviewed myself. I think the character I was playing was Stub Newell, who was 8 feet tall, and I was so young. He was like, and his arm is bent at the elbow. That's how I introduced him. And then I do the silly voice because I'd heard the Goon Show or something. So I'd be like, oh, it's so nice to be on the show. And
Yeah.
so tell me about this. So I'd start playing all the different characters, and I could amuse myself for hours. Like, you'd literally hear my little footsteps like stand up and go, Dad, you want to listen to this? No. And I come in and do another hour. I think, Dad, you got to hear this character. And come back. So I think, yes, I had to entertain myself. And then the rush I got, which you must know as well, is there's nothing better than something you already liked and then watching it through somebody else's eyes or having them listen to it. And you're watching them so that you can enjoy it for the first time again through their eyes is the rush. That's to me, that's the crack. That's the, making the hole-in-one on the golf course that keeps you chipping away, missing all the other times, is when I could take something and it's like, I made this and I'm going to show it to you. Yeah. And then you see it and they actually like it. It keeps you going for a year.
Yeah.
You must know that feeling.
Yeah, no, and it's funny that you say about the tape. I have you can't see this on the podcast, a little red tape recorder right there. That was mine as a kid.
Yep.
Recording stuff into. So that's
you and I are very similar that way. And I think that's where you hone whatever it is that's part of your brain just by forcing yourself to entertain yourself. You have to create other characters, and you create that fantasy world with its own rules. I think it makes a huge difference. For me as an only child, that was often my only companionships, but I would challenge myself to like come up with things that I was a little bit beyond my reach that I could come up with, like how ambitious could I get with sound effects and do all this kind of stuff. So that way I learned skills that I wouldn't have learned. Like, I think if you're around a bunch of other kids, you just talk about kid stuff or you hit each other in the head with a ball for hours. But with me, I was like, how do I mix something behind this so it sounds like I'm on the Alps and then I'm sailing the Matterhorn?
Right.
It's like, no, how many kids think about that?
Yeah.
And my son's an only child, and I see it in him too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about you come to LA. Is that when you started like doing sketch stuff?
Yeah, I did it in college. There was some sketch. There was a sketch review show. It was very much like the Footlights, Cambridge Circus type things. I went to American University, which is a very Ivy League type school, so it was very kind of beyond the fringe, which I loved. And I was sad to leave everyone behind on it. We had this thing called Creative Writers Workshop where you got to perform your own stuff, which led to sketch for me. Because I did sketch to protect my own material. I thought at first I was a writer who performed his stuff to actually make sure it was executed properly, but it turned out I was a performer. And the way I found that out is I started performing live, and you just learn by doing it. You know how it is. You get up there, and it's a conversation with the audience. And the creativity comes in that what made you laugh alone, and you didn't second guess that, I want to make this guy laugh and this guy. Do I like it? Creatively, would I want to watch this? Would this make me jealous if I saw someone else do it, is my thing. Then you put it up on stage, and half the time they like it, half the time they hate it. If they don't laugh, the show sucks. You do the same show, they laugh, you go, I'm genius. Right. And that's always how it is. I think the time that I turned the most was in 93. I was hired to direct a sketch television show. It was called Writer's Block. And the outdoor stuff was shot on film, indoor stuff was 3-camera, traditional Saturday Night Live type thing. Well, I didn't cast myself in it because I was like, no, you got to get real actors, you got to do it. So we're running rehearsals, and I put together kind of a Benetton ad version of a troupe versus the people that I work with that I had a dynamic with for years. And I noticed, I was like, wow, I'm trying to get the chemistry. So I just went, without being an ego thing, I just went, let me just show you sort of what was in my head. So I went down and I performed all of the sketches for them in the run-through, knowing where you needed to hit, doing all their characters, mimicking what they were doing. And I remember this guy, Mark, was the producer, and he's like, you should be in this show, dude. What are you doing? You're directing the show, you should be in it. And I was like, I'm going to give myself permission to do it. And that led to McFlap. And McFwap was such a crack troupe of people, just professional actors who we had a standard that we held ourselves to, and we had stagecraft, and it wasn't about props and hats or whatever. It was about creating this absurd reality and committing to it completely and not insulting our intelligence with something. So I think that sketch background has given me, it's a short story form, has given me discipline in writing, either for animation or whatever else you're writing. It's all sketches.
Yeah.
Like, we all have a secret conversation where it's like, yeah, we're doing an episode here, but basically it's, Life of Brian was a bunch of sketches strung together.
Right.
So let's write sketches we really like.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely.
Well, and I met you during the Lester McFwap. I
You
think
did.
That's when we first met around there. And performing all. And then after you were doing that, and you released CDs, didn't you?
We did CDs. We had an audio CD called Visual Humor.
Yeah.
Which was all visual jokes done audio-wise, or silly songs that we had come up with that we liked, because we were all kind of musicians in some degree. I played piano and a little bit of guitar, and some other people, and then our friend Greg did it. And that was a blast, because, first time we got it on Dr. Demento, we were so excited because I grew up listening to it, and it was like, hey, goals, I made it. And it felt great, because that was enough for me. My definition of success is that,
Yeah.
And we had so many great shows. We did hundreds of live shows and got to perform all over the place. Like, we went to New York, we won this sketch-off thing, we got to do Carolines, we did Chicago, all these different things. And so I wouldn't trade it for a world. We did it almost 11 years. And the pinnacle, I would say, is we did a pilot, which was before the Universal Vivendi sale, was actually, we were going to be optioned, but when they got purchased, NBC already had Saturday Night Live killed anything else that was sketch. But I bought back the pilot. I actually own it, and reconfigured it into a thing called The Archaeology of Comedy, which is a BBC-styled retrospective on a fake sketch troupe through history, from the beginning of man till now. It's always been this troupe. So it was fun doing. It was amazing.
Yeah. You've done lots of great things. I'd love to ask you about, you're such a Monty Python fan, and then you got to work with John Cleese.
Yeah.
So what was that? How was that?
It was insane. It was wonderful. Well, you know what? It's funny. It was a real test for me, because you always wonder if you're good enough, or if you're just doing a pale imitation of someone, or if the humor is coming from you or simply a cipher. And I'd done a commercial with a French producer, and I played an English character in it. And he remembered that. Well, someone in Germany was doing a comedy special on football there, or soccer, as we have here. And it was going to be John Cleese, Michael Palin. And I said, God, I'd love to do something like that. I was talking to the producer. That's really where I got into this whole thing, was through Cleese and sketch. Well, he remembered me. And Palin couldn't do it. I think he was doing the Full Circle documentary series or whatever. And the producer, who's French, thought I was English. So he told this German, I know a guy who could work with John, who's a British sketch comedian, who's very much in John's style. So they called me up and they said, do 5 of the best minutes you've ever done. So I did. And then I directed them to some of the other stuff that I had done. Well, I get this call, and they're like, it's John. Why don't you come up to my place, and we'll write some ideas down, and let's make this show. So I was like, oh, my God. So the drive up to his place, he used to live up north of here, we were going to film actually on his ranch, because he had a place big enough that you could build a soccer field in. And I remember to this day just sort of pulling up in my car and thinking, well, this is like a folk singer who likes Dylan meeting Dylan. And you're like, are you good enough to do this? Can you go toe-to-toe? And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to be myself. But I had to be English, because that was because I hired because they said Yanks couldn't do it. And I was like, all right, well, I can do British humor, and I've done it my whole life. So I pull up, and I see his head in the window of his house like that. And I'm pulling up there, and I'm like, is this really happening? I'm driving up to write with him and do it. And it was the best experience of my life, because you hear he's very imperious and this and that. No, what he is he's exacting, and he knows what he wants, and if you are on his wavelength, he's the most generous person ever. I literally sat in front of a fireplace. He stretched out on the sofa next to me with his little head down, took a nap while I'm writing with his feet here, and I'm like, can someone I know see this? And he welcomed me into the house, and he showed me how he wrote, which I learned from. So we worked out the show. Then it was just the two of us doing all the sketches, A through Z. And it was an amazing experience. He completely gave me all these little tips that I still use to this day on camera technique or how to handle people that aren't paying attention to the comedy, things like that. And it was the best experience. But what it really told me creatively was, I am me. I just happen to be someone who was on their wavelength. And John even kind of said, in the 60s, you would have been in with us. There's just some people you feel comfortable with it. We think the same. I sat him down at his kitchen table and I showed him Invention with Brian Forbes, one of those characters. He's like, "You're Peter Cook. I mean, you're basically, how do you know this?" And I was like, "This is just me." And he's like, "You didn't see this?" I'm like, "No, when would I have seen it? I wasn't even alive for it."
Yeah.
So that was validating and also just one of the best memories I'll ever have.
Yeah, that is amazing.
It was one of the good times when you meet your idol and you're not disappointed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we're wrapping up here, I want to talk about your feature that you're currently working on, that you were up till all hours of the night.
I haven't gone to bed yet.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I'm juggling. I'm doing a book for a young adult series. It's a Survive series. It's a book called Red Skies. So it was due today. Well, also, every night after I'm done doing everything else, I do compositing on Trouble Is My Business, which is it's a wry, I would say a cross between Maltese Falk and Raiders of the Lost Ark, that sort of thing. If you took a book off the shelf from the 40s and said, "I want to make this Raymond Chandler book now without the Hays Commission," that would be this movie. And Trouble Is My Business has a lot of composite shots and a lot of heavy lifting with the post. Me and Michael Smith have Luminactus Productions, so we do all the visual effects in-house. I direct and write. I co-wrote the script with Brittany Powell, who's in it, and I'm in it, and I directed it. So I've been working on it for 2 years now. So I'm really excited. It's coming out in 2017. It'll be a proper release, have a distributor, be available on VOD, but it world builds, which is what I always wanted to do with Star Wars, the Star Wars films. And I've always directed and fixed other people's stuff, but that was the first time I gave myself permission to do my own thing creatively. And it was a huge risk financially. I called in every marker that I had, all my friends. There's amazing actors in it. The crew is amazing. And for me, it's a culmination. It's like, what did Tom do from the directing and writing side and acting in the film? I could show that film and that would be enough. Mm-hmm. And then everything else has sort of evolved out of the sketch side, like, the writing. So that's Trouble Is My Business, and I really, if you want to see it, it's troubleismy.biz, plug. But that's been my life for the last 2 years.
Yeah. What do you have something in your mind already for after this? Or
yes.
Are you just, you do? Okay.
Oh, yeah. I have several projects. One's called Animus. It's a sci-fi. I want to do a comedy. I have several projects that this for me will eliminate the question you always get in pitches, which is, well, you've done everything but a feature. If you had done a feature, we let you do another one. So it gets you into a club or a different level creatively where it's like, oh, okay, he doesn't screw up features. Okay, we'll listen to your pitch. So yeah, I have lots of ideas.
Excellent. Well, speaking of plugs, if people want to find you online, where can they go?
You can look for Pithy Productions, PITH-E Productions on YouTube. DaveAndTom.com. Can't believe that was available. It's literally DaveAndTom.com has Safety Geeks, SVI. It has all of our sketches. It has Invention with Brian Forbes. If you want to see the movie, the trailer for it is up now. It has Vernon Wells from Road Warriors, one of the villains. It's troubleismy.biz, B-I-Z.
Excellent. Well, I will put links to all those things in the show notes. Tom, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure talking to you. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Actor, writer, director Tom Konkle was today's guest on 15 Minutes With. Check out Tom's film Trouble Is My Business over at troubleismy.biz and his comedy over at daveandtom.com. For more links to Tom's stuff, visit the show notes for episode 104 over at GrantCast.com. 15 Minutes With on the GrantCast is a production of Saturday Morning Media and made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who've gone to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up a monthly donation for as little as $1 a month. Huge thanks to Shay Stewart, Mer Lafferty, Jeff Peterson, Dale Gadania, Steven Staver, Jackie Klimo, Melissa Crawford, Chuck, Matthew Wayne Selznick, Dave Slusher of the Evil Genius Chronicles, Mike Coughlin, Dorothy Baciocco, John D., Kathy Crawford, Brian Greer, Carrie Whitney, Chuck Tomasi, Chris Foster, Stephen Ing, Clinton of ComedyForecast.com, Vicky DeVries, Mike Wobschall, Twitter user Butzengear, a.k.a. Wildcat, Eve Cunning, Mike Hamilton, Gaston Moreno, Reed Loveland, Ivan Asquith, Vanessa Whitney, Nancy McCarthy, and Janine Lee. If you'd like to support this show and the other fun content from Saturday Morning Media, just like the people whose names I just read, head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up your monthly donation today. You can also tell a friend about the show or leave the show a review on iTunes. And while you're over there on iTunes, be sure to click that subscribe button. That way you will get new episodes the moment they are released. If you have feedback for the show, you can send it to me directly at grant@throwingtoasters.com or get in touch via Twitter, where my username is ToasterBoy. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll talk to you next time. The GrantCast is copyright 2016 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Baciocco, executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.